Hi, and welcome to Standard Deviant School Nutrition. In this episode, we'll go over the body's primary source of fuel, carbohydrates. I'm Andy Campbell.
And I am Andy's evil twin brother, Hans. Today I will teach you of carbohydrates. Only I will do it so as to confuse you and make you cry.
Get out of here! Sorry, Mom, Dad, and I, we don't really see him a lot. You know, Christmas, 4th of July sometimes. Anyway, on with the program.
Here's what's coming up. We'll start off with some basic info about what carbohydrates are and what they do. We'll then cover simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, and we'll finish up with the wild and turbulent world of carbohydrate digestion. Stay tuned.
Carbohydrates are a major source of energy for your body. About half of the energy your body uses comes from carbohydrates. In fact, your brain right now is running on almost 100% glucose, a simple carbohydrate. We'll cover glucose and simple carbohydrates in a minute. Foods dense with carbohydrates are starches, sugars, gums made and stored in plants, and cellulose.
Did you say carbohydrates are found in cellulite?
No. Carbohydrates are found in some cellulose products, not cellulite. Cellulose is a dietary fiber that comes from the framework of plants. Examples of cellulose sources are the stems and leaves of vegetables like cabbages, seed and grain coverings like bran, whole wheat and whole rye products, and also apples and pears.
There are two categories for carbohydrates, simple and complex.
Simple carbohydrates are sugars, and the complex carbohydrates are starches and fibers.
Simple carbohydrates are foods like fruits and honey. Simple carbos taste sweet. Some simple carbohydrates, like fruits, are really good for you, while others, like candy corn, are not. Complex carbohydrates are foods like potatoes, peas, and beans.
All right, like we said, simple carbos taste sweet. Why? Well, because they contain sugar. Sugars, which are simple carbohydrates, are either called monosaccharides, mono meaning one, or disaccharides, di meaning two.
Monosaccharides are simple sugars made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. There are 6 carbons in monosaccharides, and for that reason they are called hexoses. Just like a hexagon has 6 sides, a hexose has 6 carbons. Monosaccharides are the most important sugars in nutrition because all other sugar combinations are built from them. We'll look at these different sugar combinations in just a second.
And that was a second. A lot happened in that second. Were you paying attention? Well, watch the replay. Now let's get back to monosaccharides and pay attention.
There are 3 main monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. They're all made up of variations of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The sweetness of a simple carbohydrate depends on the type of monosaccharide it contains. Though it may sound like the name of a ship in a science fiction movie, galactose is a pretty weak sweetener. So simple carbohydrates made from galactose aren't all that sweet. Glucose is the next sweetest monosaccharide, and fructose is mouth-puckeringly sweet. Glucose, or blood sugar as it's commonly called, is one of the body's main sources of energy. It's the only sugar that feeds the brain. Often, long-distance runners take glucose tablets or consume sports drinks made with glucose to raise their blood sugar level in the hope of getting more energy.
For most endurance athletes, it makes sense to use glucose supplements if their exercise routine or competition lasts longer than 90 minutes. But for your average athlete, water is just fine. Water is used for the transportation of nutrients through the body and for the overall maintenance of body temperature. Your body has enough readily available stores of glucose for most sports, so water should sufficiently help regulate the process.
Okay, so that was an introduction to monosaccharides, the first type of simple carbohydrate. The other type of simple carbohydrate is a disaccharide. Disaccharides are just pairs of monosaccharides. They're all made up of some combination of glucose and one other monosaccharide. So the disaccharides are all either glucose and fructose, or glucose and galactose. The disaccharide made up of glucose and glucose is maltose. This is also known as malt sugar. Lactose, or milk sugar, is made up of glucose and galactose. And sucrose, or table sugar, the sugar that you put on your cornflakes in the morning, is made up of glucose and fructose.
Okay, so before we move on to something else, let's review simple carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the major energy source for your diet. There are two categories for carbohydrates, simple and complex. Simple carbohydrates are sugars. Complex carbohydrates are glycogen, starches, and fibers. The sugars, which are simple carbohydrates, are either monosaccharides or disaccharides. There are three main monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, and galactose. Out of these three, glucose is most important. Disaccharides, the other kind of simple carbohydrate, are just pairs of monosaccharides. Glucose is a part of every disaccharide.
Now on to the next type of carbohydrate, complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are called polysaccharides. The prefix poly means many, and polysaccharides are made up of many monosaccharide chains. This is what we meant when we said that monosaccharides are the most important sugars in nutrition. They're the building blocks for all other sugars. There are three important complex carbohydrates in nutrition: glycogen, starch, and fibers.
First of all, glycogen is the form in which the human body stores glucose for much of its energy.
Glucose is converted to glycogen and stored in that form in the body. Glycogen is stored in the liver and muscles, just waiting to release all that energy. Whenever we need energy, the glycogen in our liver and muscles is quickly converted back to glucose, which, as we said, is the body's main source of energy.
Glycogen is stored in the form that makes it very easily convertible from glycogen to glucose. Glycogen has many places where saccharide units attach, so they can be broken off easily and used. Just think of glycogen as the human storage form of glucose.
To better understand how this works, let's visualize it. Glycogen has lots of long, highly branched chains, so the glucose molecules can be broken off for energy at many ends, rather than just at two ends. In contrast, starch is either a few branches or isn't branched at all. And guess which complex carbohydrate we're talking about next?
Hey, hold your horses. I'm thinking here. My head's killing me.
The next complex carbohydrate is starch. Starches are a form of glucose stored in plants. Good sources of starch are grains such as rice, wheat, and corn, legumes like peas and beans, and tubers such as potatoes and yams.
The last complex carbohydrate we'll look at is fiber. Fiber is the structural part of plants that cannot be broken down by human digestive enzymes, even though most are polysaccharides. Unlike most foods, stronger contractions are needed to move fiber through the GI tract. That may sound like a bad thing, but actually it's a good thing. Fiber is either soluble or insoluble. Soluble fiber aids in the lowering of cholesterol, and insoluble fiber helps with regularity.
So, even though plenty of water is still needed, fiber helps relieve constipation. Many scientists believe that fiber reduces the risk of colon cancer, and fiber also appears to lower blood cholesterol levels.
Fiber may also be helpful to people interested in weight loss, because high-fiber foods increase the feeling of fullness after meals. Excess fiber consumption, however, may interfere with the absorption of some minerals.
Why is that? Well, being that fiber aids with regularity, it increases the speed of food through the gastrointestinal tract, or GI tract. When this happens, food is moving too fast for all the nutrients, like minerals, to be absorbed.
Intestinal discomfort may occur when fiber consumption is first increased, but the body usually adjusts. Be sure to increase your water intake when dietary fiber is increased, or you'll end up with constipation. Whole grain products, vegetables, fruits, dry peas, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds are good sources of fiber. Typically, Americans consume only about 11 grams of fiber daily. The current recommendation is for 25 to 35 grams of fiber from a wide variety of sources. So get the word out.
Hear ye, hear ye. Eat more fiber. Eat more fiber. Candles half off. Tapers priced to move.
We've just looked at both simple and complex carbohydrates. Why spend so much time on this stuff?
Good question. Well, carbohydrates are the most efficient form of energy. Each gram of carbohydrates supplies 4 kilocalories of energy. In terms of priority, the body transforms carbohydrates into energy first. So, your body really likes this carbohydrate stuff. Most experts agree that 55 to 60% of a person's total food energy should come from carbohydrates.
Excess carbohydrates in the body are stored in two forms. First, as glycogen for energy, and second, as body fat. Carbohydrates also compose parts of many body substances, such as nervous and connective tissue, hormones, and enzymes.
Carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth. In the saliva in your mouth, there's a salivary enzyme called amylase. This enzyme starts to break down carbohydrates by hydrolyzing them into shorter polysaccharides and maltose.
Okay, so what did all that just mean? Well, hydrolysis is a chemical reaction where a molecule is split into two smaller products through the addition of water. The smaller products are easier to digest. We already learned what polysaccharides are. They're chains of monosaccharides. And maltose is just a disaccharide made up of 2 glucose molecules joined together.
From the mouth, carbohydrates move on down to the stomach, where carbohydrate digestion comes to a halt. No significant carbohydrate digestion takes place in the stomach. The mother lode of carbodigestion occurs in the small intestine.
Okay, so we've got these somewhat broken down carbohydrates sitting in the small intestine. What happens next? Well, the pancreas produces several different enzymes that are sent to the small intestine by hormones. The enzymes that the pancreas produces are pancreatic amylase, maltase, sucrase, and lactase. Pancreatic amylase breaks down starches, maltase breaks down maltose, sucrase breaks down sucrose, and lactase breaks down lactose.
After the pancreatic enzymes break down most of the polysaccharides to disaccharides, the disaccharides are hydrolyzed down to monosaccharides and are carried through the bloodstream to the liver. The liver then converts the monosaccharides to other compounds, usually glucose.
I'd like to say a few words about sugar. An orange and sweet, sweet honey both contain the same simple sugars. So why is an orange healthier? It's healthier because the orange also has fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Concentrated sugars like honey aren't bad for you, but since they don't contain a lot of nutrients, you don't want to stuff your thorax with them. Not that I'm trying to make a mountain out of an anthill.
There are 3 important complex carbohydrates in nutrition: glycogen, starch, and fiber. Glycogen is the form in which your body stores glucose. It's stored in the muscles and the liver. Starch is a form of glucose stored in plants. Each starch molecule contains hundreds of glucose molecules. Fibers are the structural parts of plants. They can't be broken down by human digestive enzymes, but they aid digestion. Most carbohydrate digestion takes place in the small intestine. The pancreas produces several enzymes to break down the polysaccharides into disaccharides. The disaccharides are hydrolyzed down to monosaccharides, and the monosaccharides are then sent to the liver to be converted to other compounds, usually glucose.
Thanks for watching Standard Deviant School, Nutrition, Carbohydrates. So, what have we learned today? Well, for one, carbohydrates are an important source of energy for the body. 2, I have an evil twin. How are the 2 facts related? I don't know, but you should find out because it's going to be on the test. Bye-bye.
If you've already learned about carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, check out this bonus review of the digestion process. It covers the digestion of the 3 macronutrients from start to finish.
Okay, so we've looked at how carbohydrates, fats, and proteins work in our bodies. But let's see how they work together in the digestion process. After all, how often are you going to eat a bowl of butter or a loaf of bread by itself? So, let's follow some food through the digestive tract and see how all of the digestive organs work together to get the job done.
Suppose you've taken a bite of a ham sandwich. This tasty bite of food contains fat, protein, and carbohydrate. Once in your mouth, you begin chewing the food. Enzymes in the saliva begin to break down the carbohydrate into smaller sugar units, while a pancreatic lipase enzyme for breaking down the fat is released from the tongue. The food bolus travels down the esophagus to the stomach. In the stomach, another lipase is released to work on the fat. So the two lipases now begin to break down the fat into smaller units. At the same time, pepsin, an enzyme which breaks down protein, is released and begins to break down the protein into smaller units and amino acids.
The food next passes into the small intestine where the major digestion and absorption of nutrients occurs. The pancreas releases pancreatic amylase into the small intestine, which breaks down carbohydrates into simple monosaccharides or disaccharides. Special enzymes released from the intestine walls break down the disaccharides into monosaccharides, and these simple sugars are absorbed.
The pancreas also releases lipase into the intestine, which breaks down the triglycerides, molecules of glycerol with 3 fatty acids attached, into separate fatty acids and glycerols. Bile is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. When it enters the small intestine, the bile helps the fat become more soluble so the lipase enzyme can do its job of breaking down fats into fatty acids and glycerols. The fatty acids and monoglycerides are now absorbed into the intestinal walls. The pancreas also releases protein-breaking enzymes into the small intestine. These enzymes break down the protein fragments into short peptides and amino acids, which can be absorbed by the intestinal cells.
The absorbed sugars from the carbohydrate enter the bloodstream. The amino acids from the protein travel to the liver through the portal vein, which is the vein that carries blood from the GI tract to the liver, where the amino acids are converted to glucose, fat, or put back into protein structures. In the small intestine, the fatty acids from the fat are packaged into chylomicrons, which take lipids from the intestinal cells into the body. The chylomicrons enter the blood through the lymphatic system.